son, I'm so sorry, but your dad's been killed in a car accident. But I remember my wife giving me the phone again, but her dad was still on the phone, and he said, son, I'm really, really sorry. Your mum's also been killed in a car accident.
It's emergency.
I sort of broke down completely at that point.
Did you ever think that anything like this would actually impact you?
I don't know.
It just didn't stop.
He'd been on his mobile phone for 40 minutes, flicking between dating websites, editing his profile, and spent almost £50 to engage with users on that journey.
It's so disturbing, knowing I was me.
How did you feel seeing his remorse?
I didn't really care about him. For me, I don't pay any thought to him. He has to live for the rest of his life knowing he's killed 3 people. He's no longer with his wife. He doesn't really speak to his daughter.
Every single day you have to be sat in a jail. He's still got 4 years left to come out. It's a long time for 3 seconds, or for 40 minutes of scrolling your phone. It's a hell of a long time. Junior, in researching your story, I have been shocked, I've cried, and I've really had to just think about how fortunate I really am. But it's given me the context into why you do what you do now and campaign so heavily to try and reduce the deaths on British roads. In your own words, who are you and why do you do what you do?
Straight into counselling. So my name's Junior. First and foremost, I'm a dad. I'm a husband. Certainly, unfortunately, in some cases, a squaddy. And as of the 15th of July, 2021, I've sort of became an advocate and a lead for educating people on the dangers of driving, or distracted driving, or driving whilst using mobile phones, more specifically.
Up to that point, how many years had you had your licence?
11, 12 years. So quite a while.
And your parents have been driving
all my life, literally from the second I can remember. Some dreadful cars, but yeah.
So being on the roads, just like many people, like millions across the country, is something that's very familiar to you, was very familiar to your parents. Did you ever think that anything like this would actually impact you? Because you hear about obscene, horrific crashes happening out there. You see them on the news, you see them on the telly. You don't think you're going to be in the news story. Like, how did you find out about what happened?
So on that particular day, in fact, the night before, my little boy hadn't been sleeping very well. So what I used to do, if he wasn't sleeping very well, I'd jump into bed with him, and then often I fell asleep. And then the next thing I sort of remember was my wife coming in to the room the next morning, and it was somewhere between 5 and 6 o'clock in the morning. And she looked quite upset, but she was pregnant at the time, so like instantly adrenaline started going in my mind, and I was like, oh, something must be wrong with the baby or whatever. So in a little bit of a panic, I remember her handing the phone to me, and on the other end of the phone was a dad. At that point, like, initial thought was, oh, something's wrong with the dad, something's happened. And her dad said to me, he said, son, I'm so sorry. I'm really sorry, but your dad's been killed in a car accident. At which point, I've been in the military, you've been around stuff, and you're familiar with like fight or flight, and my instant reaction in most instances is fight. But in this occasion, I had something like, which is not really spoke about much, but shock. I went into a complete state of shock, and I just froze in that moment. I couldn't tell you what was going on around me, what my wife was saying, what he was saying on the phone, nothing. I just sort of froze. And then at some point, I don't know how long it was later, but I remember my wife giving me the phone again. And then again, I was half paying attention at this time, but her dad was still on the phone, and he said, son, I'm really, really sorry. And he kept saying, I'm really sorry, but your mum's also been killed in a car accident. At which point, I sort of broke down completely at that point, really upset. And as you would expect, it took me a little bit of time to sort of pull myself around, but I thought, I need to get some air. So I walked outside. I thought, I'll take the dog for a walk, I'll just get some air. Whilst I was walking the dog, I thought, I'll ring the police. I don't know why I did it at the time, to be honest, but I rang the police non-emergency number. I kind of said what he told me, that there'd been killed in a car accident. I didn't have any other details other than what he told me. And the police officer at the time said, okay, I'll call you back. I'll see what I can find out if there's anything happened. And he rang me back pretty quickly, to be honest. And he said, we're really sorry to be telling you this way. We've been trying to track you down for a little bit now. We understand you're in the military. You've not long moved. We shouldn't be telling you this way. We wanted to send someone out to you, but yeah, both your parents we think have been involved in a fatal road traffic collision. And would you be willing to give some DNA? At which point, I don't know how you deal with that question. To be honest, I don't know what I thought about.
And
at the time.
that was on the phone call back.
Mm-hmm. He then said, like, obviously I said yes, and then he said some specialist officer or somebody from Durham Police would contact me and they'd go from there. He was just like a normal police officer. I don't think he knew much about it. And then eventually someone rang me back and gave me a little bit of details, asked me again if I was willing to give DNA and whatnot. I think at that time, again, I can't tell you why, but just in my head, I thought I need to go up north. Like, although I have a house up there, I didn't have anywhere to stay. Like I said, my wife was pregnant. We had my little boy, and we had a scan at the hospital that day. So I thought, right, we'll go for the scan. So I sent my little boy to childcare. We went for the scan, had the scan, everything was all right. Picked my little boy up, put the dog in the car, and then we just went north. Didn't know where I was going to stay at this time. Didn't really know why I was going up north, to be honest.
Do you think if it wasn't for your military mindset and that kind of fight or fright mentality, even though you were in shock, do you think you'd have been able to go to that hospital and get that scan?
I don't know. I don't think the military are very good at conditioning you to be a certain way, but it's not the same for everyone. Everyone deals with grief, things happening in completely different ways, and I've seen a broad spectrum of how people deal with different things. I can't specifically say it's the military or if it's my upbringing or if it's whatever else. Not really sure, but knowing me and my personality, I would have done that no matter what had happened, I think. Like, in my mind, the most important thing at that time, albeit something dreadful's just happened, was, is my wife okay? Is our baby all right? Sound. Now deal with the next problem in hand.
How long, in terms of a timeline again, was it from that kind of moment of the crash to that phone call, then that point of contact, being asked for DNA?
So the accident happened round about 5:30, give or take, the previous day.
Is that in the evening?
Yeah, so from the evening. And then I found out sort of early morning the next morning. I think they'd obviously been investigating at that point, trying to get in contact with family members. How they initially they spoke to my auntie, who then was in contact with my wife's dad, and then it sort of got passed down slowly. But they had a lot of trouble working out, firstly, that my parents were involved in the accident because it wasn't initially obvious. It took them a long time to work out they were involved. And then secondly, trying to track down who they were because of the nature of the accident. So I can't tell you the timeline in the police's minds, but it took a significant amount of time before they were even aware that they needed to contact anyone from my family.
Who were they to you?
Well, my mum and my biological dad split up when I was really young. So she was pretty much my rock, so to speak. She brought me up from by herself, from being about 3-year-old. And up until we were about 7, it was just me and her. Then she met who was on paper my stepdad. I call him my dad because he was absolutely my dad. But she was the most resilient person you could ever wish to meet. She, no matter what life threw at her, whether it was cancer, whether it was difficult relationships, abusive relationships, like she was disabled from a car accident. Like, no matter what it was, she was just so resilient. She'll just carry on. We never had loads, stereotypical northern upbringing, council estate type stuff, working class. But I never wanted for anything, which was incredible. And then my dad came along when I was about 7, and he kind of flipped a lot of that on his head. He was the same. He was this big guy opposite to my mum. My mum was about 5 foot nothing, really small but like really loud. Whereas my dad was 6 foot odd, like 20 stone bloke, broad southern accent. He was born in the northeast, but he had a broad southern accent because he lived in London. and he was just like quiet as anything unless you knew him, and then you just hear this Cockney accent come out. But yeah, they were opposites, but like I said, he sort of gave me a whole different perspective on things. He took me to football matches from being like 7, 8 year old. Never been to a football match in my life. Never been anywhere really. He took us on holiday. Just little things, and again, he didn't have a lot, but he was such a family person, and he was like, I wasn't biologically his, but he treated me as such. And I think the key, more than anything, that stuck out for them in particular was they taught me so many life skills. Like he had really bad mental health issues, bipolar disorder, depression, and he'd go through periods where he'd really struggle in life, but he'd always focus on me and making sure I was all right, and focusing on my mum, and vice versa. She would look after him. She'd do all the tidying. Probably where I've got a lot of the really positive traits from, and a lot of the really negative traits like my OCD and cleaning. And my wife will attest to that. It's not the greatest thing.
You said something there about your mum is that she would basically fight through anything that was thrown at her. And when you told me how that morning when you're dealing with that grief and you're trying to figure out your brain, your body's trying to figure out how to deal with that grief, that you went and did that scan at the hospital, I actually think that's really profound, that moment, because not everyone would do that. And I can clearly see the two dots that align from the way that your mum was from just a short period of time. Are you telling me about that kind of moment then? So you're still in the bubble of everything happening within this 24 hours. You leave that hospital after having the scan. You're heading up north. It's your safe place. It's where you come from. It means a lot to you. When did you start to find out more details about what happened and how it happened?
I think I was very lucky. One of our friends that was up there said, "Oh, you can stay at our house." So we went straight there, and then family liaison officer from the police called me while we were on the way and said, "Well, we'll meet you there if you've got a place." I think at this point they were still wanting to try and get some DNA, but they said, "We'll meet you there and we'll have a chat then." And then when I got there, they sort of were able to outline like the broad picture of what had happened, i.e., a lorry had went into the back of their vehicle. It killed both them and another individual called Paul. And there was a number of other different people involved in the accident or the collision. And then that was pretty much it. Apart from the fact that the damage was that bad that they needed DNA to be able to identify the bodies. They spoke about the matter within the vehicle was really difficult to identify at the time. So they were having some trouble, which is why they needed the DNA.
That's a lot to take in such a short space of time.
Yeah, I think the DNA thing was a prominent thing for me, because it was like you kind of expected to be able to formally identify something, but then when they started to explain like how bad it was and how that there was contamination of DNA, and your mind wanders when you don't know the actual facts, and you think back to all them CSI programs or whatever, and you're like, how bad could it have been that they're struggling to identify an individual?
You literally feel like you're living in a documentary or living in a movie in that moment.
Yeah.
How long was it before your mind switched to the next kind of bullet point, which was who was the driver, who did this? Did it take a little while because you were so wrapped up in that bubble to even consider that next point?
Yeah, but for me, it took a while. I think my sisters were slightly different. They were like quite angry straight away, which grief is natural. Whereas for me, I wasn't necessarily focused on the who, because I knew, one, I was dealing with my family and the circumstances that had been presented, but two, that it wasn't going to bring them back. So it didn't matter to me who at that moment in time. It just mattered to me that, one, they were gone, and two, what could I do about it?
You say the who didn't matter at you in that matter of time, but when you figured out the kind of why that who had done what he did that then change how you felt about that situation, that grief? Did the anger start to creep in then?
Yes, I think the why was a key thing, mainly because it was avoidable. When you know somebody's used their mobile phone while they're driving.
I pulled a quote from the investigation, which is, He had been on his mobile phone for 40 minutes, flicking between dating websites, editing his profile, and spent almost £50 to engage with users on that journey. So checking your mobile phone for even a second can be catastrophic, but when you're on it for 40 minutes non-stop on dating sites, I do find that absolutely absurd. How on earth do you process or deal with information like that?
That was the most frustrating thing. Like, it's one thing being on your phone. I'm not naive. I've used my phone myself. Like, it's natural. Something goes off, you pick your phone up, you check it, happy days. But yeah, like you said, 40 minutes continuously. And that was just from his return leg to where he was going. He'd actually been using his phone all day, up until the point where he picked up his load of fertilizer and then he started returning back to where he was going. At which point he took a stop, and while he was at the service station, that's when he started going onto these dating sites, or the webcam sites as they were. And then at which point, I imagine in his brain, he was like, I've spent some money on speaking to these people. I don't want that to go to waste. And he carried on. But to carry on for that length of time, to the point where 3 seconds before the actual collision, he'd sent a message and however much money. And I imagine 3 seconds, you travel in 3 seconds, you can travel up to 90, 100 meters potentially at that speed. He's probably looked up from his phone and had zero time to react. There was no breaks, nothing.
It's interesting you mentioned the 3 second mark, because you almost, when you really start to think about it, think, well, 46.9% of people in a survey over recent years admitted to using their phones whilst driving. And if you then think about that as like almost like a chart of people that are on it for 3 seconds or 2% of the time while they're driving, or 0.5% of the time, but for someone that's spent 40 minutes, if they're just solidly on it, do you think that is, do you categorize that person different to maybe a builder that's just checked on something else? And how different is your view on that post and pray?
I think if you were to just look in isolation at the collision and my story, you would absolutely say that it's much worse to be on it for a prolonged period of time. But when you actually take a step back and look at it holistically, it's a habit, it's an unconscious habit that you've then generated. So using it for 2-3 seconds at a time, or a couple of times a week or whatever, it is probably not that bad. And people justify it in loads of different ways. The motorway's clear, whatever it is. And whatever you tell yourself, you're probably right at that time. But then you build up this unconscious habit where you continually use your phone and you don't even think about it. At which point, to him, it was probably a thing. He was a driver by trade. He'd probably done it loads before, never had an accident.
You think you're a pro.
Exactly that. And he's picked up his phone. Well, yeah, I've never been in a collision so far. Yeah, no dramas. He's not even thinking about using his phone. He's just going through the motions. Become an unconscious habit. And that's my worry, where people try to justify it and go, oh, it's just a quick check of a message, or I'm just a quick phone call, or whatever it is. But before you know it, you're justifying it to yourself. And then you're not even thinking about it. And then something happens. And it might not happen to you. It might happen to somebody else.
One of the reasons I really, really wanted to put your story out there for my audience and do it in my way is because I know what my audience looks like. I meet them at shows. I meet them at the garage. I meet them at petrol stations. I've met lorry drivers who listen to the podcast on the road. I've met old, young, generally baffles me who actually listens. But I know that most people that listen all have a driver's license. And with such enormous numbers, in even admitting to reusing their phones whilst driving, I thought that it was really important to put your story out on this platform today, because I just, after watching it, it moved me so much that it just makes you think how silly these little seconds are, and it feel like nothing, but what an enormous impact they can have at the other end of the funnel. It's like that 3 seconds at the top of the funnel at the top piece can just develop into just devouring your whole life, your entire life, or most of it. And in the case of the driver, he got 8 years for that specific sentence, correct?
8 years, 9 months or something like that.
8 years, 9 months.
That was before the sentencing laws had changed, but yes.
So your story was obviously, it was picked up on the news, the crash, and then because of the severity and obviously the details, which you've shared today, it got pushed out even further because it was just so absurd. And I think the conversation we've just had about the why doing what he was doing just pushes it to that extra level. But I know that you did documentary with BBC One on this, and they actually went and filmed with the driver whose name was Iona, wasn't it? How did you feel seeing his kind of remorse and how it had also impacted his life?
I think this is where my opinion might differ to a lot of people's opinion, because I was very much of the opinion I didn't really care about him. I didn't want to think negatively about him or positively. I wasn't care if he was remorseful, didn't care if whatever happened to him, to be honest. Just didn't want to give him the time of day to think about it, and not in a negative way, but just didn't want to be consumed by somebody that had affected my life. So wasn't bothered that he did this video, although I do use part of that whenever I do the education pieces, because what I like people to understand is most likely he was just a normal person going about his day like everyone else was. He didn't expect to be in a collision that day. He didn't expect to go out and kill 3 people. He probably had no intention of killing 3 people, but he made that unconscious choice to use his mobile phone, which led to it. And then when you see him in the videos, and he is a little bit remorseful, but you can understand that a normal person has just had his life completely ruined. And you can say so much for him, his life's completely ruined. Well, it's kind of on him. He made that choice. But it's not just his life. He had like a 13-year-old daughter at the time and a wife. And I just think from a dad's perspective, like we all remember what it's like to be teenagers. If you're a 13-year-old girl going through school and your dad's just killed 3 people for being on dating sites, imagine what that's done to her life. Imagine the people that are going to be all over her on social media, whatever it is. And that got me more than anything, the impact that it would have on his family. So I use that as a big piece because it could literally happen to anyone. Everyone's driving around, using their phones, whatever. You don't expect it to happen. You see it on the news, pay lip service to it, and you don't expect it to happen. But it could literally happen to anyone, and I think that video of him proved that.
If you're listening to this episode and have your own business and need help with your digital marketing services, then I'm here to help. Just drop me a message, as I own Tweak Marketing, a leading agency specialising in technology, healthcare, automotive and many more sectors. We built websites from small individual one-man bands all the way up to huge global companies. We're here to help you take steps forward in your digital marketing. Get in touch with me via the link in the description and we'll hop on a call and see how we can help you.
The other thing that most people and the big proportion of the listeners will have all been through or will go through at some point in their life is grief. And another reason that I wanted to speak to you today is because after listening to you talk prior to this, the way that you compartmentalize and deal with grief is very different to a lot of people. Would you say that you have learned to deal with it from a very logical approach and kind of block out the emotional side of it, like almost put it to a side? Have you found through this any like ways that you've identified as coping with grief as a mechanism?
I think for me personally, it was I can't change what's happened, so what can I do? And it was trying to turn that negative into a positive, and that's why I do a lot of the talks. You can see it's a coping strategy for me because I'm able to speak about it quite candidly. So yes, I am reliving parts of it constantly, but at the same time, I'm putting a positive spin on it. So maybe that's helped. I don't know. I've not been through counselling or anything like that, but I think that's just a makeup of who I am and how I've approached things throughout my life. You mentioned it earlier about my mum, and that's how she sort of dealt with things in the past, and maybe I've just picked up on that. Just who I am as a person.
Many of us are products of their parents as well. But why don't you choose to go down the route of like counselling? Is it because you feel tough enough to be able to deal with it? And do you think feeling that sense of toughness is a really good trait to have?
No, I think counselling would probably help, if I'm honest. I don't feel like I need it though. I feel like I'm able to deal with, it's very much my own opinion, but I feel like I'm able to deal with it in my own way, i.e. doing talks, educating people. But I think, should there come a time where I feel like I'm struggling to deal with things or my emotions, or I don't quite understand why I'm seeing things acting in a certain way, then I think I probably would go down that route. But like I said, I understand there's a need for it. I just, for me personally, I don't know how talking to a professional, and it's probably my lack of understanding of counselling in general, but I don't know how talking to a professional about what's happened would change the way I think, because I already think
in a way that's comfortable.
Yeah.
going back to the timeline, we've covered the initial day in 2021, the 15th of June. And then moving on from that, the kind of 24 hours afterwards. And what we're really getting into is how like you've coped with that grief and compartmentalized it. You've mentioned that you do coaching. How did that come about off the back of like a horrific thing, a horrific incident? It's obviously affected you, so you can see why you would speak about it. But did you find a point where it like really mattered to you? Like it was something you always meant to do?
I think because I work in a teaching role anyway, I see the value in education. And I was like, it's particularly in the military. I started off in the military sense. I could see more young people coming through the doors, and I'd see it more and more on a daily basis where people would be driving vehicles and they'd be using their phone. And I'm just like, they don't understand the impact that this could have. And it was like, what can I do about it? And it started just by getting people in my organisation together into a lecture theatre and delivering a talk. And I sort of just took them through my journey and what had happened from the phone call from my wife's dad to all the way up until all of the details about the accident. And what I found was that I had a few people approach me after, and they said that one, it was really impactful, and it completely flipped on their head what they thought about using a mobile phone while driving. Like straight away, people were like, "I'll never use a mobile phone," and they might have been just saying it to me. And a lot of people were thankful that I'd give it because they understood me as a person. So then I thought, well, what else can I do? So I started delivering it to some of the trainees, the people who had no idea who I was, no idea about my journey. And then that just led on to companies that might have been interested. So I did a couple with Eon and different companies along the way, and it's just transpired to keep going.
4 years on and still delivering the message through the podcast. And no, it definitely does make a difference. But what I want to understand is like, if you're going down the road, driving 20, 30 minutes, an hour's journey, wherever you are, what is it like if you're like sat alongside someone on the motorway and you physically see them on their phone? Like,
Yeah.
do you start to itch? Like, how does it make you feel? Do you try and flag them down? Like, because of your story, because of everything that's happened, it obviously must affect you more than it would someone that's not been through that. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think that's my biggest bugbear. Everyone when they're driving has bugbears with people. They get really annoyed at people cutting them up, whatever. Mobile phones is a thing for me. I hate seeing people on it because I understand the impact that they can have. So I'm a big fan, and I say it on every one of my talks, is that everyone has a responsibility to call it out. And the reason I say that is because I've done it a few times. Well, in fact, pretty much every time I see it, that's possible. Is that I'll bid my horn at somebody or I'll wave at them or whatever, and I'll gesture to them to like get off your mobile phone. I literally seen it yesterday.
Does that ever cause any road rage incidents with you?
Yeah, people get really annoyed, but I think that's a positive one because they're not focused on the mobile phone anymore. They're focused on being annoyed at me. Be annoyed at me all day long. But eventually, that's a defense mechanism that people naturally have. So when that defense mechanism subsides and the anger or frustration subsides, they'll think to themselves, was I in the wrong? Probably. So I don't mind. You can be annoyed at me all day long. Some people don't feel comfortable calling people out because they don't want anger or whatever directed at them, and that's fine. But there's other ways and means about it. Durham, for example, offer a service where you can, if you video somebody of dashcam footage or whatever, you can submit that. And I know people have their own thoughts about submitting footage to the police for people to be prosecuted, but I kind of think any metric that stops people using their mobile phones is a positive one.
Did you have to be there for your siblings as well? Because you mentioned that they dealt with the grief in a very different way to you. Do they have a completely different view still 4 years on of the driver to what you do?
I think so. Firstly, both my sisters clearly are women, and I think that impacts you when you understand what he's doing on dating sites and webcam sites slightly differently to a male. But generally speaking, they're very different people. They're of a different age group. They're older than me, so they were very angry. I think that it was such a needless act, and they struggled for a long time. For different reasons. I think one of my sisters has come to terms a little bit more with it, and she did like your restorative justice type thing. She went to meet him before he was deported, to try and have like a conversation with him. And I think she wanted to get her frustrations across to him and the impact that it had on her. In less of an angry way, but just like, this is the impact it's had on me individually.
Have you ever wanted to do that?
No interest.
You don't think you ever will?
Like I said, I think for me, I don't pay any thought to him. He'll go and live his own life and do what he wants to do, and I will live mine. Me speaking to him and showing him the impact that it's had on me, my family, whatever. I don't think certainly won't bring my parents back, but he has to live for the rest of his life knowing he's killed 3 people. Whether I'm shoving that in his face or not, he's got to live with that. He's no longer, as far as I'm aware, with his wife. He doesn't really speak to his daughter. That for me is, I couldn't fathom a world where I can't speak to my kids. So he's got to deal with that because of the choices that he made. I'm sure that's bad enough for him.
Yeah, that's utter hell. Absolute utter hell. And I think it's just for a point that listeners could pause there and just take that in for a minute. About every single day you have to be sat in a jail, in a prison, still got 4 years left to come out. This podcast hasn't even been going for 4 years. And I've done a hell of a lot of journeys in this van and miles on the road in between then and now. It's a long time for 3 seconds or for 40 minutes of scrolling your phone. It's a hell of a long time. And the impact that it can have on your life is utterly horrific. But you've obviously worked with previous guest of the podcast, George's Car Media, and Owen, who do a lot of things around road safety. Has that really opened your eyes to just like how big some issues are on the road? And then on the subject of phones, do you think that the country with the technology we could have could just solve this problem straight away?
I think firstly, definitely working with different people and seeing, like, as a community of educators and car people, that everyone sees all these different issues. Mobile phones is a huge issue. Distracted driving in general is a huge issue, and it's increasingly getting more focus, which means the statistics are naturally rising because people are looking at it. So the more people that are speaking about it is better. And since getting involved with George a little bit and Owen, I've seen the power of social media. As a non-social media person, you see the impact that it can have, just reaching all these people, which is why I love doing things like this podcast.
There's a really interesting link there that I'd like to make, though, because you said a few minutes ago that even when you, almost like a bit of a Karen, have a go at somebody,
Yeah.
you know, just like think, oh, he's just a Karen or whatever, he's having a go at me, and F you,
Yeah.
like I'm fine, I know what I'm doing. You said that you know that a couple of minutes later, they'll actually go, yeah, I know I was in the wrong then.
Yeah.
And it's just that initial reaction. George and Owen, I think it's fair to say, have their fair share of hate online as well as positivity. And I think it's people potentially in that initial bubble of just that reactability of to comment like what they're thinking, you don't know, at the police, etc. But do you think that even a lot of the negative hate that you see for trying to reinforce this online of I'm fine, you're stupid, blah, 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 do you think it actually still gets through to that audience as well based off the same thing that you just said?
I think subconsciously it has to, because it becomes a thought. Like, even if you're criticizing somebody, you think about it. And I'll give you a context. In the workplace that I work, we had loads of posters all over the walls about the equipment that we use. Nobody read them. They'd been there 3, 4, 5 years. Not one person had read them. And I changed them for some like random motivational quotes, one by The Rock, for example. And straight away, people hated them. People absolutely hated them, but they read them. So I had an impact. And it's the same online. No matter what you put out there, negative or positive, somebody's interacting with it or reading it, it's having an impact. So people might hate on George and Owen for saying certain things. But in their mind, they're registering what they're saying. And in order to have an opinion on something, you kind of have to understand what they're saying to a degree. So it becomes a conscious thought then.
The story around your parents' crash and the circumstances that followed went viral. Like the crash video itself racked up hundreds of thousands of views on different platforms, shorts, everything. And then a subsequent documentary was made about the BBC. So obviously a lot of people got to understand this story. It was horrific. But through your own eyes, where you see it deeper, you're more involved, you've seen every ounce of detail, and the emotions affected you far more than anybody else that's read it or watched it. Have you learned that this happens and it doesn't get publicized? Like, what goes on behind the scenes that doesn't always make the front page?
Yeah, there's a lot. This happens constantly. I work with a number of different people now who have had similar things happen to them that had no media coverage, no people are talking about it, nobody was trying to change any of the laws. It's happening every day. I mean, you've heard the statistics before. There are 3 to 4 people dying on UK roads every single day. And granted, not all of them are attributed to mobile phone use, but there are a significant number of accidents, collisions, whatever you want to call them, that are happening because of mobile phone use, distracted driving. So, yeah, I think certainly there are lots of people out there that haven't had this coverage that have been affected, probably more so than I am.
You get frustrated at the police and the government and the roads, I guess, it's highways more than anything else, that something could be done about it without. It's a bit like speeding. I had this conversation with Owen.
Yeah.
Because I say, right, well, like if you're in a supercar or something quick and you can put your foot down and there's nothing to stop you or catch you, you're just going to do it because you can't help it. But there's so much technology on a vehicle, you know, you can click a button and put a limiter on.
Yeah.
So like, why wouldn't, if you want to enforce something so much, which is almost like what highways, etc. say, you go to all the trouble of spending 4 billion on smart motorway systems that don't work and X, Y, and Z, and they could have just put a bit of software on all the cars as a limiter when it goes in for its MOT. Do you get frustrated that a similar thing doesn't happen with mobile phones?
Yes. I mean, for me, you have to incentivize people or educate them. They're the 2 things you can do to stop people using it. What am I going to get to not use my mobile phone? Or why shouldn't I do it? The laws is one thing, fines, camera systems, whatever we're putting in place, that's one thing, and people have their own opinion of them. Or you look at certain companies' Waze. Everyone uses Waze now rather than Google Maps, all right? How do you report an incident on Waze? Well, you have to interact in some way with the screen in your car. You press it, there's traffic there, happy days. That could be solved. Google own Waze, they could put in some voice command that solves that issue. Yes, you're distracted, but not to a certain level. Ford, in some of their vans.
What I'm also getting at is I watch like the video you did with George and Owen, and I see the money that people spend on camera systems that are now looking down into cars and using AI to see if people's on their phones. Like, genuine question, because like, I was thinking about it on the way up here. Why isn't like your armrest in the centre of every car just got a thing in it that the car doesn't drive, a bit like putting your seatbelt in, unless your mobile phone is in that area? So if it senses your mobile phone's in that area, it's in that box stowed away, you can drive. If not, it's a bit like having your seatbelt on and off in the car. They solved it with that. And I just think, when you actually look at it, were we just not dealing with this in the right way? Are we just incompetent? Do you think like the nation and like are we just incompetent?
I think there are things that can be done. There will always be ways around them things because naturally with everything, people try and find ways around. With mobile phones, until we get at the core of it and show people the impact that it can have and why, I don't think you will fully address the issue. And I use an example of drink driving. Every year at Christmas, the police run a campaign, there's TV adverts, all about drink driving. Never anything about distracted driving on mobile phones. Never. And the military, prime example of that. Every year we stick a car outside a military camp and say, don't drink drive, blah, blah, blah. They'll breathalyze people all around Christmas time. Nothing about using mobile phones.
It's only when you sit and think about it that I'm now starting to think about this thing with putting the phone in the middle and the car beeping at you. But then I just thought to myself, she was saying that people just buy 2 phones. Like there is so many ways just to get around it. But I then thought when I was lucky enough to be in Vegas, which I do every other year, I was in a Cybertruck and I remember we were just coming back towards where our hotel was. We were 7 minutes away. And my mate Rory, we'd put it in autopilot mode. So it was literally just driving. I've just named and shamed him, haven't I? Sorry, Rory. We put it in autopilot mode and we could see on the massive screen in the middle of this Cybertruck, you could see the line and it was going to go. It was like 4 or 5 lanes going to the left and it had chosen where it was going to go and it knew where it was going to go next. And he thought, this is so sick. I've got to film this. Like it's driving by itself. So he picks up his phone, puts it in 0.5 mode and straight away the thing went, put your phone down or the vehicle will shut down kind of thing. because it's looking at you through a camera you can't even see.
Yep.
You can't even see it, so you can't even cover it up. And it's saying, like, as much as I'm in autopilot, you will not pick up your phone in this vehicle.
Yeah.
Why isn't that standard already like a seatbelt in a vehicle is?
I agree. The technology's there in the same way that if you take your hands off your steering wheel, it can detect that you've not got your hands on the steering wheel. The companies would argue that why should we do that when the law doesn't force us to do that? And we would argue, why doesn't the government make that standard? And
So what do you think is the answer to that?
money
Why then?
is the answer, because from a government perspective, if they start dictating to all these car companies, this is the law, this is what you need to put in your cars, they will go sound, well, that's not the law in Germany or wherever. We'll start selling more cars there. It always comes down to money at the end of the day. I don't agree with it. I think, like you said, if there's a technological way to get around it, then why aren't we doing it?
Yeah,
A simple example is, like I said, incentivize. If you build in wireless charging to all cars, people are incentivized to keep their phone there to charge it. The basic incentive.
But almost, to me, after hearing your story, seems like it's as profound as the moment seatbelts were made to go in cars. It feels like off the back of something so horrific, something should be done about it, to the point that, like, I literally can't drive my cars if I don't put my seatbelt in. So then it stops you from doing it, and that becomes the addiction. You know, you get in the car and subconsciously we just put on our seatbelts.
Yeah.
It's like if something was brought in like that, then when we wouldn't, subconsciously it just wouldn't happen. You'd get to use Apple CarPlay and like the in-car features a lot more, and stop messing around with your phones. Is there any way to actually take that further and deal with that and solve that? Because you're so passionate with pushing forward to educate people, but like, do you ever think that these people can't be educated?
Never. Everyone can be educated. It's a case of showing people. I think I don't want to say the good thing about my story, because clearly it's not a good thing, but it's impactful. It, like you said, you to some degree were impacted by it. I think if you hear that what can happen, and you look at the individual that it happened to, he was just a normal person. Everyone to some degree can relate to that. So it's not like trying to teach maths. People can't relate to it. Everyone can relate to, I'm just an average person. I probably use my mobile phone before in the car. At which point, as soon as they can relate to a story, then you can start to teach them, right, this is the dangers. This is how far your car will move traveling at this speed. This is how many accidents there are on the road every year. This is how many fatalities. This is your specific area, etc., etc.
But you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. So, and it's if that one or two people slip through, that is going to be that thing. And I genuinely hope that automotive brands do something about it over the next few years, because it was really interesting being in that Tesla in America.
Yeah.
Like, it did that, and I was thinking that's actually quite good, isn't it? Like, it's annoying. Like, we wanted to take a video. We wanted to take the video of this car self-driving. It was sick, like going through the middle of Vegas, but we literally couldn't do it. I had to do it from over like the passenger side. I filmed my mate, but it does make you think when you actually just sit down and think about it for a minute on what the impact is, but also the impact that the accident had on your life is enough to make anyone think, myself included, because a lot of people admit to using their mobile phones, and think about the amount of people that don't admit to using their mobile phones. So bringing it back full circle, since losing your parents and then life has continued and gone on, and even though you've spun the negative into a positive, what's the thing that you miss the most? Like, what interaction, what has been, would you say, the thing that you feel has been the biggest impact that you wish was there?
I think I used to speak to my dad pretty much every day or every other day, just on the phone. It was natural whenever I'd walk the dog, I'd just give him a quick ring. Like I said, he struggled with his mental health, but it was my way of just keeping in contact with him. Then the same with my mum. I'd ring her once a week, maybe. But just that had a bit of interaction. I think the thing that affected me most is my little girl. She never had the chance to, she wasn't born at the time, never had the chance to meet them. So there's pictures of my little boy with them and videos, but there's none of my little girl. So like, we've got pictures in the house, and my little girl will look up and she'll be like, oh, who's that? Or why is Arlo got a picture with them and I don't? And that, I think that's the, knowing that they'll never have that relationship with their grandparents. That's the thing I struggle with the most, more than anything.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to speak to me and many thousands of people that'll be listening and watching. I hope you should be, because this is a really profound and impactful one. So again, thank you for taking the time to speak to me about it. I hope that it has educated a lot of people that are listening and makes them think twice. Every time now you're going to think of my silly ginger voice and your northern voice before you pick up the block in your car and potentially make a decision that's going to have a huge impact on you and somebody else. So thank you for telling your story. I think it was really, really good to put it on road to success and let people listen to it. So pleasure to meet you.
Thanks very much, Ben.